The Galactic Concord had ruled the stars for 12,000 years, and in all that time, nothing had ever truly surprised them. They were ancient, they were wise, and they believed they knew everything worth knowing about the universe and its creatures. Ambassador Vethani of the Selthari Collective stood before the great observation window of the Concord Eternal, watching ships drift through the darkness like tiny lights against an endless black canvas. Her pale blue skin reflected the glow of distant suns, and her 4 eyes blinked slowly as she processed the report in her hands. "This cannot be correct," she whispered to her assistant, a small creature named Tovik, who belonged to a species that resembled what humans might call a worried owl. Tovik clicked his beak nervously and said, "I have verified it 3 times, Ambassador. The human colonies along the outer reach have gone completely silent, and we have received no communication from any of them for 17 standard days now." Vethani turned away from the window and walked across the polished floor of her office. Her long robes trailed behind her like water flowing over stone, and her mind raced with possibilities that she did not want to consider. The humans were a young species, barely 3 centuries old in terms of space travel, and the Concord had always viewed them as somewhat amusing. They were loud, emotional, and far too eager to prove themselves, but they were also useful for certain tasks that more civilized species preferred not to handle. "Have we sent investigation teams?" Vethani asked. "We have tried," Tovik replied, his feathers puffing up with anxiety. "But every ship we send is turned away at the border of human space. They are not attacked or harmed, but human vessels intercept them and simply tell them to leave. And when our captains ask why, the humans say nothing at all." This was strange behavior indeed. Humans were known for many things, but silence was not one of them. They loved to talk, to argue, to make speeches about honor and justice, and all the other concepts that older species had abandoned as childish long ago. Vethani pulled up her console and began searching through intelligence reports. What she found made her blood run cold, which was saying something because her species was already cold-blooded. For the past 18 months, humans had been quietly returning to their home systems. Human merchants had closed their shops on alien worlds. Human workers had resigned from their positions. Human students had withdrawn from prestigious academies. And human diplomats had been making polite excuses and departing one by one. "They are gathering," Vethani said, more to herself than to Tovik. But for what purpose? She remembered something then, a memory from long ago when she had first been assigned to study human culture. She had read the original contact files, the reports from the first Concord ships to encounter Earth, and what those reports contained had given her nightmares for weeks. Earth was classified as a death world, a class 12 to be exact, which was the 2nd highest rating possible. It was a planet of violent storms and crushing gravity, of earthquakes and volcanoes, and ice ages that came and went like seasons. Every continent was filled with predators that had evolved specifically to kill, and the humans had somehow risen to dominance over all of them. The early scientists had recommended quarantine. They had suggested that Earth be surrounded by warning beacons, and that no contact ever be made with its inhabitants. But the politicians had seen opportunity, and the merchants had seen profit, and so the warnings had been ignored. Now Vethani wondered if that had been a terrible mistake. A chime sounded at her door, and she said, "Enter." The door slid open to reveal a human woman in a dark uniform. She was tall by human standards, with brown skin and hair cut short in the military style that humans seemed to favor. Her name was Commander Elise Vance, and she was the last human diplomat remaining on the Concord Eternal. "Ambassador Vethani," Vance said with a small nod that humans used as a greeting, "I heard you have been asking questions about my people." Vethani studied the human carefully. Vance's face showed nothing, which was unusual because humans typically wore their emotions openly for everyone to see. This blankness was more frightening than any anger could have been. "I am concerned," Vethani admitted. "Your colonies have stopped communicating. Your people have withdrawn from Concord space, and no one will tell us why. Surely you can understand why this makes us nervous." Vance walked further into the room and stood before the observation window where Vethani had stood moments before. She looked out at the stars with an expression that might have been sadness or might have been determination. "Do you know why I stayed behind, Ambassador?" Vance asked. "I assumed it was to maintain diplomatic relations," the ambassador replied. Vance laughed softly, but there was no humor in the sound. It was the kind of laugh that spoke of old wounds and older grievances. "I stayed because someone needed to deliver a message," Vance said, "and because I wanted to see the looks on your faces when you finally understood." Vethani felt fear creeping up her spine like ice water. She had lived for 300 years, and had negotiated with warlords and criminals and beings of immense power. But something about this human woman made her want to run and hide. "What message?" Vethani asked, though she was not sure she wanted to know the answer. Vance turned to face her, and those human eyes, so small and strange compared to Selthari eyes, seemed to hold the weight of millions of souls. "We asked for your help," Vance said, her voice steady and calm. "When the harvesters came for our colonies, when they took our people by the thousands to be processed and consumed, we begged the Concord for assistance. We pleaded with your councils and your committees. And do you remember what you told us?" Vethani remembered. She wished she could forget, but she remembered perfectly. "The council determined that military intervention would be too costly," Vethani said quietly, "and that your outer colonies were considered acceptable losses in the interest of maintaining peace with the harvester fleets." "Acceptable losses," Vance repeated, and those two words dripped with 17 colonies' worth of grief. "You left our people to die because we were not important enough to save." "The harvesters are ancient and powerful," Vethani said, knowing even as she spoke that her words were hollow excuses. "The Concord has maintained peace with them for millennia through careful appeasement. It is how we have survived." "And how many species have you sacrificed to buy that survival?" Vance asked. "How many civilizations have you fed to the machines so that you could sleep safely in your comfortable stations?" Vethani had no answer, because the answer was too shameful to speak aloud. Vance smiled then, and it was not a friendly smile. It was the smile of someone who had been waiting a very long time for this moment. "We stopped asking for help 200 years ago," Vance said, "and we started helping ourselves. You see, Ambassador, humans have a saying that goes like this: if you want something done right, you have to do it yourself." "What have you done?" Vethani whispered. Vance walked toward the door, pausing only to look back over her shoulder with those unreadable human eyes. "We have been patient long enough," she said, "and now, finally, we are ready. I suggest you watch the news feeds from the Kellis system very carefully over the next few days, Ambassador, because history is about to change, and you will want to tell your grandchildren that you witnessed it." Then she was gone, and Vethani was left alone with Tovik and a terrible feeling that the universe she knew was about to end. "Ambassador?" Tovik said nervously. "What should we do?" Vethani looked out at the stars, those countless points of light that suddenly seemed much darker than before. "We wait," she said, "and we pray to whatever gods might still be listening that humans are more merciful than we deserve." 3 days passed after Commander Vance delivered her warning, and Ambassador Vethani spent every moment of that time buried in classified archives that she had never before had reason to access. What she discovered there kept her awake at night and made her question everything she thought she knew about the young species called humanity. The original contact files were stored in the deepest levels of the Concord's database. Protected by security measures, that suggested someone had wanted them forgotten. Vithani had to call in favors from 3 different intelligence directors just to gain access. And when she finally opened the files, she understood why they had been hidden. "Tovik," she called to her assistant, who had been bringing her food and drink while she worked. "Come look at this." The small owl-like creature hurried over and peered at the screen with his large golden eyes. What he saw made him let out a sound that was half gasp and half screech. "Is that their homeworld?" he asked. "Yes," Vethani said. "That is Earth, and this is the ecological survey conducted by the first Concord exploration team to visit the system." The data scrolled across the screen like a nightmare given form. Earth was a world that seemed designed by some cruel god to create the most dangerous creatures possible. Its gravity was nearly twice the galactic standard, which meant that any species evolving there would develop incredible strength just to move around. The atmosphere was filled with oxygen, a highly reactive gas that most species avoided because it was essentially a slow-burning poison that caused aging and cellular damage. Yet, humans breathed it constantly. Their bodies adapted to live in what was basically a gentle fire. The planet experienced constant geological violence, with plates of rock grinding against each other to create earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. It was bombarded by radiation from its star because its magnetic field, while present, was not strong enough to block everything, and its climate shifted between extremes that would have wiped out most civilizations. "Look at this section," Vethani said, pointing to a part of the survey that detailed Earth's fauna. Tovik read aloud in a trembling voice. "The planet contains apex predators in every biome, including aquatic environments. Large carnivores with masses exceeding 500 kilograms are common, and pack hunters demonstrate sophisticated cooperative strategies. The survey team recommends immediate withdrawal and classification as a prohibited zone." "But that is not the most frightening part," Vethani said, scrolling further down. She stopped at a section that analyzed human physiology, and Tovik made a whimpering sound as he read it. Humans were persistence predators, which meant they did not hunt by being faster or stronger than their prey. Instead, they simply followed their targets for hours or even days, never stopping, never resting, until their prey collapsed from exhaustion. No other known species in the galaxy hunted this way, because no other species had the endurance to do so. Their bodies could repair damage that would be fatal to other beings. Broken bones would knit back together, torn flesh would heal, and humans could even survive the loss of certain organs or limbs. They could function in temperature ranges that spanned nearly 80 degrees, and they could survive without food for weeks and without water for days. "They are monsters," Tovik whispered. "No," Vethani said thoughtfully. "They are survivors, and there is a difference, though I am beginning to think we should have paid more attention to that difference." She opened another file, this one from the Concord Science Division, and what it contained made her scales flush dark with shock. 2 decades, she said. That is how long it took them to reverse engineer our faster-than-light technology. The Velthari took 3 centuries. The Morvax took 500 years. But the humans did it in 20 years. And according to this report, they pretended they had not done it for another 50 years after that. "Why would they pretend?" Tovik asked. "Because they were studying us," Vethani realized. "Watching how we reacted, learning our weaknesses. And all the while, we thought they were primitive newcomers struggling to understand technology that was beyond them." She felt sick as the full picture began to form in her mind. The humans had been playing a role for centuries, acting like eager but clumsy children, while secretly building something that no one in the Concord had ever imagined. A new file caught her attention, and she opened it with trembling hands. It was an intercepted communication from human military channels, dated just 3 months ago, and it contained a speech that chilled her to her core. The speaker was identified as Admiral Kira Okonkwo, commander of the Human Systems Alliance Navy. And she was addressing her captains from the bridge of a ship called the Thermopylae. Vethani activated the audio recording and listened. "My fellow officers," Admiral Okonkwo's voice filled the room, strong and clear and filled with quiet fury. "For 200 years, we have asked the Concord for protection against the Harvesters. And for 200 years, we have been told that our lives do not matter enough to risk their precious peace." There was a pause, and when she continued, her voice was harder. 17 colonies, she said. That is how many we have lost to the machines. 17 worlds filled with our families, our friends, our children. All taken because the Concord decided we were expendable. But we are not expendable. We are human, and we do not forget. Vethani heard sounds in the background of the recording. Sounds that she recognized as cheering and stamping feet. The noise of thousands of soldiers agreeing with their commander. "Today I am proud to tell you that the waiting is over," Admiral Okonkwo continued. "For 2 centuries we have built in secret, we have trained in silence, and we have prepared for this moment. The Concord thinks we have a few hundred ships at most, but they are wrong. So very wrong." Her voice dropped to something that was almost a whisper, but somehow more terrible for its softness. "We have mapped every Harvester patrol route, found every hidden base, located every dormant factory moon where they build their cursed fleets. We know where they sleep, and where they hunt, and where they take our people to be processed. And when the signal comes, we will strike everywhere at once." The recording crackled, and Admiral Okonkwo spoke her final words. "The Concord taught us that we could only rely on ourselves. So that is exactly what we have done. Let no one say that humans do not learn from their lessons. Now prepare your ships and your crews, because when we move, the galaxy will never be the same again." The recording ended, and silence filled Vethani's office like a physical weight. "How many ships?" Tovik asked in a voice barely above a whisper. Vethani pulled up the intelligence estimates, then pulled up the corrections that had been added just days ago as more information became available. The numbers kept climbing, and each revision made her hearts beat faster. "The original estimate was 300 vessels," she said. "Then it was revised to 800, then to 1,500. The latest estimate suggests they may have as many as 4,000 warships, each one built to specifications we have never seen before." 4,000? Tovik squawked. "That is larger than the Concord's entire defensive fleet." "Yes," Vethani said, "and I suspect even that number is wrong, because if the humans have been hiding their true capabilities for this long, there is no reason to believe they would reveal everything now." She stood up from her desk and walked to the window again. Out there in the darkness, somewhere beyond the lights of the station, a storm was gathering that would shake the foundations of everything the Concord had built. "We underestimated them," she said quietly. "We looked at their short lives and their emotional nature and their violent history, and we decided they were no threat. We never considered that those same qualities might make them the most dangerous species in the galaxy." "What do we do now?" Tovik asked. Vethani thought about Commander Vance's warning to watch the Kellis system, and she knew that whatever was coming would happen soon. The humans had been patient for 2 centuries, but their patience had finally run out. "We watch," she said, "and we hope that when the humans finish whatever they have started, there will still be a galaxy left for the rest of us to live in." Far away, in the darkness between stars, thousands of human warships began to move. The Harvester fleet entered the Kellis system at dawn, though dawn meant nothing in the endless night of space. They came as they had always come, with terrible majesty and absolute confidence, their massive black ships blocking out the stars like moving shadows of death itself. The Kellis system was one of the jewels of Concord space, home to 3 inhabited worlds and nearly 12 billion citizens from dozens of different species. It was wealthy, cultured, and completely helpless. because the Concord had never believed in maintaining strong military forces when diplomacy and appeasement could achieve the same results. Governor Tellus of Kellis Prime received the Harvester transmission with the same sick fear that every leader felt when the machines came calling. The message was simple and brutal, as Harvester messages always were. "We require tribute," the mechanical voice announced. "You will provide 5 million biological units for processing within 6 standard rotations, or we will take what we need by force." Biological units meant living beings, people with families and dreams and fears, and the Harvesters would grind them down into raw materials and fuel for their endless expansion. This was how it had always been. This was how the Concord had maintained peace for 10,000 years, and everyone accepted it because the alternative was extinction. Governor Tellus was preparing his response, trying to decide which population centers would be sacrificed this time, when his communications officer made a sound of pure confusion. "Governor," the officer said, "we are detecting new contacts entering the system, thousands of them, and they are not Harvester signatures." Before Tellus could respond, his view screen filled with light as hundreds of ships emerged from faster-than-light travel at distances that should have been impossible. The Concord's FTL technology required ships to exit far from gravitational bodies, but these vessels appeared directly in the orbital paths of the Harvester fleet, close enough to see individual weapon ports with the naked eye. They were human ships, and there were more of them than anyone had ever imagined possible. Admiral Kira Okonkwo stood on the bridge of the Thermopylae and looked at the enemy she had spent her entire career preparing to fight. The Harvesters were ancient, built by a civilization that had died millions of years ago, and they had been preying on organic life ever since. Today, that would end. All ships. She spoke into her command channel, her voice steady, despite the magnitude of what they were about to do. Weapons free. Execute Operation Final Silence. What happened next would be studied by military historians for thousands of years, and they would never quite agree on how the humans had accomplished it. The human fleet attacked from every angle simultaneously, using tactics and technologies that the Harvesters had never encountered. They fired weapons that disrupted the machines' communication networks, blinding them and preventing them from coordinating their defense. They deployed missiles that seemed to anticipate where the Harvesters would move before they moved there. The Harvester dreadnoughts were massive, each one the size of a small moon, but the human ships danced around them like wasps attacking a bear. They were faster, more maneuverable, and their crews fought with a fury that the emotionless machines could not comprehend. On the Thermopylae, Admiral Okonkwo watched as her fleet tore into the enemy, with 2 centuries of rage fueling every shot. "Target the command vessel," she ordered, pointing to the largest Harvester ship at the center of the formation. "If we take that out, the rest will lose their coordination protocols." The Thermopylae led a wedge of heavy cruisers straight into the heart of the Harvester fleet, their shields absorbing punishment that would have destroyed any Concord vessel in seconds. Human engineers had spent generations studying Harvester weapons and building defenses specifically designed to counter them. The command vessel tried to flee, its massive engines flaring as it attempted to enter FTL and escape. But the humans had planned for that too. A ring of ships surrounded the Harvester's escape vector and generated a gravity disruption field that made faster-than-light travel impossible. "You came to our colonies," Admiral Okonkwo said quietly as her ship closed in for the killing blow. "You took our families, and you thought we would just accept it like all the others. You were wrong." The Thermopylae's main cannons fired, and the Harvester command vessel broke apart in a bloom of fire and shattered metal. Across the Kellis system, the remaining Harvester ships began to falter as their command network collapsed. Without central coordination, they reverted to simple attack patterns that the humans had long since learned to counter. 11 minutes after the battle began, it was over. Every harvester vessel in the Kellis system had been destroyed, and not a single human ship had been lost. But this was not the end. It was only the beginning. At the exact same moment that Admiral Okonkwo was accepting the surrender of the Kellis system's governor, similar battles were erupting across the galaxy. Human fleets emerged from hidden staging areas and struck at harvester positions everywhere at once. In the Morvax expanse, a factory moon that had been building harvester ships for 50,000 years was obliterated by concentrated antimatter bombardment. In the Velthari Nebula, a dormant harvester armada that had been sleeping for millennia was destroyed before it could fully activate. In 100 different systems, harvester patrol fleets were ambushed and annihilated by human forces that seemed to appear from nowhere. The Concord watched in stunned disbelief as their communication networks filled with reports of human victories. They had believed the harvesters to be invincible, an eternal threat that could only be appeased and never defeated. But the humans were proving them wrong with every passing minute. Ambassador Vethani stood before a wall of screens in the Concord Eternal's war room, watching the carnage unfold across known space. Beside her, representatives from a dozen species stood in horrified silence, unable to process what they were witnessing. "How is this possible?" whispered the Morvax delegate, his tentacles writhing with distress. "The harvesters have terrorized the galaxy for 100,000 years, and these humans, these children, are destroying them like they are nothing." Vethani thought about all the files she had read, all the warnings that had been ignored, and she finally understood the truth that the Concord had been too arrogant to see. "They are not children," she said. "They never were. They are survivors of a world that tried to kill them every single day of their existence, and that made them into something we have never seen before. We looked at their short lives and saw weakness, but short lives mean they learn fast, adapt fast, and fight fast." Commander Vance appeared beside her, and for once the human's face showed emotion. She was smiling, but there were tears in her eyes as she watched her people's vengeance unfold across the stars. 200 years, Vance said softly. "We have been planning this for 200 years, ever since the Concord told us that our colonies were acceptable losses. We swore that we would never let anyone hurt us again, and we kept that promise." "You could have told us," Vethani said. "You could have asked for our help." Vance turned to look at her, and the smile faded from her face. "We did ask," she said. "We asked 17 times, once for every colony that was taken, and 17 times you refused. So we stopped asking and started doing, because that is what humans do when no one else will help them." On the screens, the final Harvester stronghold, a massive station at the edge of known space, disappeared in a flash of light as human bombs tore it apart from the inside. Across the galaxy, silence fell. Not the silence of fear or death, but the silence of shock. The silence of a universe that had just witnessed the impossible. The harvesters were gone. A species that had preyed on organic life for longer than recorded history had been wiped out in a single coordinated attack by a civilization that most of the galaxy had dismissed as young and primitive. And the humans who had done it did not celebrate. There were no victory speeches, no triumphant announcements. There was only a message, broadcast on every channel in every language, from Admiral Kira Okonkwo herself. To all species of the Galactic Concord, her voice echoed across the stars. "We asked for help, and you gave us silence. So we became the help we needed, and now the silence belongs to the harvesters. Remember this day, remember what we have done, and remember that we did it because no one else would." The message ended, and the galaxy held its breath. No one knew what would happen next, and that uncertainty was the most terrifying thing of all. In the days that followed, the destruction of the harvesters, the galaxy waited in terror for what the humans would do next. Every government expected the worst, because that was what powerful civilizations did when they achieved victory. They conquered, they expanded, They took what they wanted from those weaker than themselves. But the humans did something that no one had anticipated. Recovery fleets bearing the flag of the Human Systems Alliance began arriving at worlds that the harvesters had used as processing centers, places where countless beings had been taken to be converted into fuel and raw materials. These were places of horror, facilities filled with the screaming and the dying, and they had existed for longer than most civilizations could remember. Human soldiers walked into those places of nightmare and began setting people free. On Kethis 4, a world that the harvesters had used as a collection point for nearly 3,000 years, rescue teams found over 2 million captives from 40 different species waiting in pens to be processed. The humans gave them food and water and medical care, and then they gave them something that no one had given them in a very long time: hope. "You are safe now," the human medics told them again and again. "The harvesters are gone, and they are never coming back." Ambassador Vethani watched footage of these rescue operations from her office on the Concord Eternal, and she felt something she had not felt in a very long time: shame. The Concord had known about these processing worlds for millennia. They had known that millions of beings were suffering and dying in harvester facilities, and they had done nothing because the cost of action had seemed too high. They had balanced lives against convenience and decided that some people simply were not worth saving. The humans had made a different choice, and they were proving it with every person they rescued. A communication request appeared on Vethani's console, and she saw that it was from Commander Vance. She accepted the call with a mixture of curiosity and dread. Vance's face appeared on the screen, and she looked tired in a way that went beyond simple exhaustion. There were dark circles under her eyes and lines on her face that Vethani did not remember seeing before. "Ambassador," Vance said, "I wanted to speak with you before the official diplomatic channels begin. There are things you should understand about what we have done and what we plan to do." "I am listening," Vethani said. Vance took a deep breath and began to explain. "When we started planning this operation 2 centuries ago, there were some among us who wanted to use it as the first step in conquering the galaxy. They argued that the Concord had betrayed us and that we owed nothing to anyone but ourselves. They said we should take what we wanted because we had the power to do so." She paused, and something like pain flickered across her features. "We debated for decades," Vance continued, "and in the end, we chose a different path. We decided that we did not want to become the thing we hated. The harvesters were monsters because they saw other beings as nothing more than resources to be used. The Concord enabled them because they saw us as expendable. We refused to make the same mistake." Vethani felt her heart's beating faster as she listened. This was not what she had expected to hear from the species that had just demonstrated military power beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen. "What do you want?" Vethani asked. "You could demand anything, and we would have no choice but to give it to you. Why are you not taking what you have earned?" Vance smiled, and it was a sad smile, the smile of someone who had seen too much suffering and wished things could have been different. "We want a seat at the table," she said. "A real seat. Not the token position you gave us before. We want a voice in Concord decisions and the power to prevent what happened to us from happening to anyone else." "That is all?" Vethani asked in disbelief. "That is everything," Vance replied. "We did not fight this war for territory or wealth. We fought it because innocent people were dying and no one else would stop it. All we want now is to make sure it never happens again." In the following weeks, the Concord held emergency sessions to discuss the new reality they faced. Representatives from every member species gathered to debate what should be done, and for the first time in 10,000 years, they did so with genuine urgency. The humans had not demanded surrender, but everyone understood that the power balance had shifted permanently. The species that had destroyed the harvesters could destroy any of them just as easily, and that knowledge changed everything. Admiral Kira Okonkwo addressed the Concord Assembly via holographic projection, her image standing tall and proud before thousands of delegates who had once dismissed her species as primitive. "We are not your enemies," she told them, in a voice that carried the weight of every human who had ever suffered under harvester claws. "We never wanted to be warriors. We came to the stars, hoping to find friends, hoping to learn from civilizations older and wiser than ourselves, hoping to become part of something greater." She paused, and her eyes swept across the assembled delegates with an intensity that made many of them look away. "Instead, we found a galaxy that saw us as disposable," she continued, "a civilization that would sacrifice millions of innocent lives rather than risk discomfort. You taught us a terrible lesson, that we could only rely on ourselves, and we learned it well." Her voice softened, but somehow became more powerful for its gentleness. "But we also refuse to become what you made us," she said. "We have the power to conquer you all, and we choose not to use it. We have the power to demand tribute and submission, and we refuse. We ask only for equality, for respect, and for a promise that no species will ever again be abandoned to predators for political convenience." The vote that followed was unanimous. The Human Systems Alliance was granted full membership in the Concord, with voting rights equal to the oldest and most powerful species. New laws were passed guaranteeing military protection to all member worlds, regardless of their strategic importance. And deep in the archives of the Concord, the old files about Earth and its dangerous inhabitants were unsealed and made public. Every species in the galaxy read about the Deathworld and the impossible creatures it had produced, and they understood finally what they had been dealing with all along. Ambassador Vethani requested a private meeting with Commander Vance after the assembly concluded. They met in a small garden on the Concord Eternal, surrounded by plants from 100 different worlds. "I have been wanting to ask you something," Vethani said as they walked among the alien flowers. "Ask," Vance replied. "Why did you really stay behind when the other humans left? You said it was to deliver a message, but you could have done that from a distance. Why did you risk yourself?" Vance stopped walking and looked up at the artificial sky that covered the garden, painted to resemble the blue heavens of Earth. "Because someone needed to see it through our eyes," she said. "Someone from the Concord needed to understand what we were feeling, why we did what we did. I stayed because I wanted you to know that we are not monsters." She turned to face Vethani, and her human eyes were wet with tears. "We lost 17 colonies," she said, her voice cracking for the first time. "Millions of our people, taken and processed while the galaxy watched and did nothing. Do you understand what that does to a species? Do you understand the rage, the grief, the desperate need for vengeance that fills you when the people you trusted betray you so completely?" Vethani could not answer, because she had never experienced anything like that. Her species had always been protected, always been safe, always been powerful enough that no one dared threaten them. "We had every right to hate you," Vance continued, "every right to burn your worlds and take everything you have. But we chose not to, because that is not who we want to be. We came to the stars, looking for friends, Ambassador, and we still hope to find them." She held out her hand in the human gesture of greeting, and Vethani, after a moment of hesitation, reached out with her own hand to clasp it. "Perhaps we can start again," Vethani said. Vance smiled through her tears. "Perhaps we can." 1 year passed since the day the humans destroyed the harvesters, and the galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. Old fears faded slowly, replaced by something that felt almost like hope. Ambassador Vethani stood on the observation deck of the Concord Eternal, but the view before her was different now. Human ships patrolled the space lanes alongside vessels from a dozen other species, their distinctive angular designs a constant reminder of the new order that had emerged from the ashes of the old. She was no longer just an ambassador. The Concord had appointed her as the first official liaison to the Human Systems Alliance, a position that required her to spend half her time in human space learning their culture and building the bridges that should have been built centuries ago. "You look thoughtful," Commander Vance said, appearing beside her with 2 cups of a hot human beverage called coffee. Vethani accepted the cup with a small smile. She had grown fond of the bitter drink, much to the horror of her Selthari colleagues, who considered it a form of mild poison. "I was remembering how I felt the first time you came to my office," Vethani admitted. "I was terrified of you, of all humans. I thought you had come to announce our destruction." Vance laughed softly, and this time it was a warm sound, filled with genuine humor, rather than the cold bitterness Vethani remembered from their first meeting. "To be fair, I was being deliberately mysterious," Vance said. "We had waited so long for that moment, and some part of me wanted the Concord to feel at least a fraction of the fear our people had lived with for 2 centuries. "You succeeded," Vethani said dryly. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the ships drift past like leaves on a gentle stream. "I visited one of your worlds last month," Vethani said. "Earth itself, actually. Your government invited me to attend a memorial ceremony for the colonies that were lost." Vance's expression grew serious, but she nodded for Vethani to continue. "I have seen many things in my 300 years," Vethani said, "but I have never seen grief like what I witnessed that day. Millions of humans gathered to remember their dead, and they wept openly, without shame, without trying to hide their pain. In Selthari culture, such displays of emotion are considered improper. But watching your people, I understood something I had never understood before." "What was that?" Vance asked. "You feel everything so deeply," Vethani said. "Your lives are short, and so every moment matters more to you. Your love is fierce, because you know how quickly it can be taken away. Your anger burns hot, because you cannot afford to wait for justice. And your grief is bottomless, because every loss diminishes you, in ways my people cannot truly comprehend." She turned to face Vance directly, her 4 eyes meeting the humans' too with an intensity that surprised them both. "That is why you won," Vethani said. "Not because of your weapons or your technology, but because you cared more than anyone else. The Concord had grown old and tired, content to sacrifice the weak to preserve the comfortable. But you refused to accept a universe where innocent lives were expendable, and that refusal gave you the strength to change everything." Vance was quiet for a long moment before she responded. "We nearly became the thing we hated," she admitted. "There were moments during those 2 centuries of planning when the anger almost consumed us. We had to fight every day against the temptation to let our rage define us, to become conquerors instead of liberators." "What stopped you?" Vethani asked. "Memory," Vance said simply. "We remembered what it felt like to be helpless, to watch our people taken while no one came to help. We remembered the silence of the Concord when we begged for aid, and we decided that we would never make anyone else feel that way." She gestured toward the ships outside the window. "Every patrol we fly, every rescue mission we run, every time we stand between predators and prey, we are keeping a promise to ourselves. We are being the help we wished someone had given us." Below them, through the transparent floor of the observation deck, Vethani could see the gardens and gathering spaces where beings from across the galaxy mingled and talked and learned about each other. She saw human children playing with Selthari younglings, chasing each other around fountains, while their parents watched with expressions that crossed all species barriers. "I heard an interesting statistic yesterday," Vethani said. "Applications for cultural exchange programs with human worlds have increased by 400% since the war ended. Species that once dismissed you as primitive now send their brightest students to learn from you." "That terrifies some of my colleagues," Vance admitted. "They worry that we are being corrupted, That prolonged contact with species who view us as exotic curiosities will change us into something we are not. And what do you think? Vethani asked. Vance considered the question carefully before answering. I think change is inevitable, she said. We change the galaxy, and the galaxy will change us. The question is not whether we will be different in 100 years, but whether we will be better. And I believe we will be, because we are not alone anymore. She turned to look at Vethani with an expression of genuine warmth. We came to the stars hoping to find friends, she said, echoing words she had spoken once before. And I think, finally, we have. Months later, Vethani returned to the Concord Eternal for a ceremony marking the 1-year anniversary of the Harvester War's end. Delegates from every member species gathered in the Great Assembly Hall, and for the first time in the station's history, human flags hung alongside the banners of the ancient civilizations. Admiral Kira Okonkwo gave the keynote address, her silver hair gleaming under the lights as she spoke to a galaxy that had once ignored her people's cries for help. A year ago, she began, we showed the galaxy what humans are capable of when we are pushed to our limits. We destroyed an enemy that had terrorized the stars for 100,000 years, and we did it because no one else would. The assembly was silent, hanging on her every word. But destruction was never our goal, she continued. We are builders, not destroyers. We are healers, not killers. The war we fought was a surgery, removing a cancer that had grown too powerful to ignore. Now the surgery is complete, and the healing can begin. She smiled, and it was a smile that somehow contained both the grief of everything humanity had lost, and the hope for everything they might yet become. To the species of the Galactic Concord, I say this, we are your partners now, your allies, your friends. We ask only that you remember the lesson we taught you, that no life is expendable, that no species is too small to protect, that the measure of a civilization is not its power, but its compassion. She raised her hand in a gesture that humans used to signal peace. The silence that fell across the stars a year ago was a silence of fear, she said. But today, I ask you to embrace a different kind of silence, the silence of safety, the silence of a galaxy, where predators no longer hunt the innocent, where children can sleep without fear, where every being knows that if they cry for help, someone will answer. Her voice rose with emotion as she spoke her final words. We came to the stars looking for friends, and we found a galaxy that needed saving, so we saved it. And now we ask only to share in the peace we have created. Let the silence of the harvesters be replaced by the laughter of children, the songs of celebration, the quiet conversations of beings who have learned to trust each other. Let the stars remember, not the darkness that once threatened them, but the light that drove it away. The assembly erupted in applause, and Vethani watched as beings from across the galaxy rose to their feet in tribute to the Deathworld species that had taught them all what it truly meant to be civilized. Outside the great windows of the assembly hall, the stars shone bright and steady, and the silence between them was no longer frightening. It was the silence of safety, the silence of hope, the silence of a galaxy that had finally learned what friendship meant. And somewhere in the distance, human ships patrolled the darkness, keeping their eternal watch over the innocent, standing guard against any threat that might emerge from the void. They were the Deathworlders, the survivors, the impossible children of a world that had tried to kill them, and they had become the protectors of a universe that had once abandoned them. Had done. And the stars were grateful.